Hello, we're looking at example 4 in lesson 9.1, which is on the ellipse in your pre-calculus textbook. We're going to start on page 879. Before we actually go to the problem, just want to remind you of a couple things. When we're going to solve this problem, this is the formula that we're going to use. Now, what's different about this one and the one I did in example 2 that should be in the math lab is this one is, notice that when you have x minus h and y minus k, your center is not going to be at the origin. It's going to be the opposite of whatever h is and the opposite of whatever k is. That's what the minuses stand for there. So it's going to be some of the same principles that we had in example number 2, except for the center is not going to be at 0, 0 this time. All right. So if we move over and look at example 4 here, it says to graph x minus 1 squared over 4 and y plus 2 squared over 9 equals 1. Now this is standard form of what an ellipse should look like. Now what we have to establish is, again, because these are minus, then the center is going to be the opposite of that. So the center of this one, the x value is going to be 1, and your k value, because that was a positive 2, you could write it as minus 2. So that means your k value is at negative 2. That means the center of my ellipse is going to be at 1, negative 2. Now, we'll start by graphing that on an ellipse, and then we'll move on with some of the others. Okay, so notice that in this picture here, look down here, this is 1, negative 2. So my center is now there. Now, the other thing is the bigger number is under the y. Again, the smaller number is under the x. Whichever one the bigger number is under, that is your major axis or your main axis. And remember, the foci always fall on the main axis. So if this is 9, think of it as 3 squared. And if this is 4, think of it as 2 squared, because that means from the center, since that's under y, I'm going to go up and down 3, and this one is going to go left and right 2, because that's under the x value. So notice if I started at my center here and I went right 2 and left 2, that's 2 of my points right there, which would be 3, negative 2, and negative 1, negative 2. And if I started at my center and I went up 3, I would be at 1, 1, and if I was at my center and went down 3, I would be at 1, negative 5. And those become my vertices, or the parts that are going to help me graph the parabola, the ellipse, excuse me. And so the other part that you need to know, again, you're trying to find the foci, which is always, you've got to just memorize this. I've said this several times, but c squared equals a squared minus b squared. This is the formula that must be used to help you find the foci, and the foci is always your c value. So we already know what a squared is, we know what b squared is. Remember, the bigger one's always a squared, the smaller one's always b squared. So 9 minus 4 is 5. So if c squared is equal to 5, then c is going to be the square root of 5. So remember that, again, because the foci are on the main axis, and the main axis happens to be up and down this time, it means you're going to add this to your y value. So remember, the original one, center, is at 0, negative 2. If I now add square root of 5 and minus square root of 5, because that's what the square root of 5 is plus or minus, then I get 1, negative 2 plus the square root of 5, and I get 1, negative 2 minus the square root of 5. And even though those look a little strange, those are your foci. And again, they would be located, you could turn those into actual numbers if you wanted, whatever the square root of 5 is, and add that to negative 2, but your foci is going to be somewhere in there and in there, equidistant from the center. Okay. And so I know it's hard to see when you see that kind, but you could always put that in your calculator and kind of see what that number actually is, and do the same thing here and see what that number actually is if you were wanting to put them literally on a graph. But this is called the exact answer just to leave it in radical form. All right. Hope this was helpful.